Hi, this is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, and I want to welcome you to our podcast. I'm also an alcoholic in long-term recovery into my 49th year through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and for that, and for so many people that I've met along the way, I am extremely, extremely grateful. A couple of announcements before we get going. First, invite you, if you have not done so, to please visit our website. It's called Two-Way Prayer. And if you have visited it, I encourage you to send other people to check it out. Two-Way Prayer is the thing that really kind of turned me around in my own recovery. When I was 20 years sober, I kind of hit a wall and needed a little more juice in my program. And that was when I discovered the history, and particularly the history of AA, and particularly its connection with the Oxford group and this thing they call two-way prayer. So I think it's a real life changer, and I hope you will visit it and listen to some of the videos on there and get some of that information. We're doing a workshop on Saturday, November the 6th, and that will be from 10 to 12:30 p.m. Central Time. And there's information for that on the website. And if you need a flyer on it, you can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I will be very happy to send it to you. Okay, we are doing a series now on Tom Powers, and Tom was sponsored by Bill Wilson back in the 40s, and they became good friends and associates in a way on a number of projects in Alcoholics Anonymous. Tom helped Bill write the important book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, the second edition of the big book, AA Comes of Age. But he also wrote his own book where he went, I think, a lot deeper into some of the spirituality that we find in many of those books. And he titled his Invitation to a Great Experiment. And the idea behind this book is helping people to experiment with the God problem. I'd say problem. For many people coming into recovery, it is a problem. And Tom kind of guides us through that and does a really masterful job of explaining it and inviting us to the spiritual journey. And to help us understand that, we've been tapping into a great resource. Matt D. is from upstate New York. He knew Tom very, very well and is now in charge of the archives. Tom has left a great number of writings, and Matt's going through those and trying to get those out to the world, because I think that's something that really should not be lost. So Matt, welcome once again to the podcast. Good to have you.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks again.
All right. And we're just chugging right along and going through the book, kind of chapter by chapter. May have to skip a few because we won't have time to get into all of it. If you want to get in touch with Matt, and I'll put a link to him in the show notes. You can write him at All Addicts Anonymous @gmail.com. And I'll also put a link to where you can purchase the book. And I strongly encourage you to do that. It's really a book that everybody who's serious about the history and about recovery would do well to have it in your library. Picking up where we left off last time, in this episode, I want to get into the three tools that Tom talks about that are going to be necessary if we're going to find this God experimentally. It would be necessary to have three helpful tools, and those are the right people, the right books, and finding the right laboratory. So let's start off with finding the right people. Matt, how did that come about for you in your life when you were struggling? Fill us in on that part of the early journey.
Yeah, sure. I think, when it comes to the relationship of right people, you back it up to what we spoke about last time, which is this thing of honesty. It seems to me that whether it's brought on by some kind of a crisis, which we talked about too, where you're literally left, in a sense, stripped in an ego sense, and you're open, or whether it's from just personal hard work on yourself, where you see this, a need for honesty. That's a very rare thing. Usually it comes by crisis for most people, but regardless, when you start to, when you actually are starting to begin to be honest with yourself, it always seems that the right people appear. And it very well may be that you were around them for months or years and you had no idea that a helping resource was available to you. But essentially, you can be, barred from it by how closed off you are, which is not a thing you realize until you start to investigate, do a little truth work, But it often is, these things go hand in hand. The truth work, being honest with yourself, hitting a crisis, and the right people. And he goes through the right people here. He basically divides them out into three different types. There are people who are ahead of you. They may be a spiritual director of some kind. If you know the history of AA, that Bill Wilson himself had relied on Father Down. He had several people that he relied on spiritually for direction. A mutual spiritual director to both Bill Wilson and Tom Powers was Gerald Heard from California, who was a contemporary, actually the senior, if you will, in a group of British writers and screenplay writers. Aldous Huxley was part of that circle. There were several others, but Gerald Heard was kind of the father of them all, if you will. And he was a spiritual director to both Tom and Bill, without a doubt. So there are people who are ahead of you. There are people who are with you side by side, if you will. Sometimes they're up and you rely on them. Sometimes they're down. These are people that you're working with side by side. And then there are those who are, I certainly won't say below, because that gives you the wrong connotation, but people who are kind of behind you on the road to recovery or to spiritual life. And those are the people, it's very critical that you have them in your life as well, because those are the people that's what this whole thing is about. Once you start to get out of yourself, these principles are never meant to be kept to oneself. I mean, I think that's what impressed Tom so much about this idea of using the 12 steps beyond the barrier of just being an alcoholic. These principles, this way of life, was such a wonderful, beautiful thing that he did not want to keep it to himself. And I think that is what that flavors this entire book. I mean, this book is basically written as a cloak and dagger 12-step act, if you will, for people who are non-addicts, to really try to bring them through the 12-step way of life. He's using a lot of religious examples or faith-based traditions to kind of express the different principles. But anyways, those are the people that you need. You need those who are ahead of you, those who are side by side, and those who are depending on you for help, and learning from you.
And this journey, when you're serious about it and when you're honest about it, then the right people show up.
They always show up.
They always show up. Yeah.
They always
what
show
happened
up.
to me uh, and they were not the usual kind of people you'd think you're going to get your help from, eh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, ironically, there's a little portion in here where he talks about just that thing, that you may, he says, when it really begins to happen, we may find ourselves learning about God from a man with pimples and a bad temper who chews his gum too loudly. Indeed, it can be worse than that. We may have to learn from a recovered alcoholic, a reformed criminal, or an ex-whore. This sort of thing is not inevitable, of course. The conventionally outcasts have no corner on the knowledge of God. Some of them think they have, and so fall into a kind of inverse snobbery, but it is not truly so. Our teachers may turn out to be quite ordinary folk, an industrial executive, for example, or a traveling man from Scranton, or a housewife with 3 children and allergies. Yes.
When he talks about,
yeah,
when he talks about knowledge of God, in some ways it might be more accurate to say an experience of God.
yeah.
Because I was in a Jesuit seminary when a group of people took a real interest in me, knew I had a problem, broke through my defenses, which were pretty formidable, but they kept hammering away at me. And I'm looking at these guys with PhDs and holy men, and I'm looking at these drunks who knew me better than the other guys did and would not let me stay the way I was. They knew I was dishonest, and they knew I had to break through if I was going to live. And they didn't give up on me.
Yeah. And I think that the equation we talked about earlier, the 3 different types of persons,
Yeah.
you need those who are just like you, because it's very hard. I mean, not every addict, but so many addicts are trying to find help in religion, or at least that was the story of early AA before the 12 steps were around, and they found they couldn't really access it adequately. Yeah. It was that they really needed people that were just like themselves in the same kind of jam. And that made it possible for them to be able to glean help from spiritual traditions, as the big book mentions, doing. Right. Without having, without working inside the culture of people who are just like you with the same kind of problems, it becomes extremely difficult to try to get any help that way. We really need these 3 types of persons in our lives all the time.
Right. And again, when you're ready for a change, again, I don't want to focus on myself too much, but at 20 years sober, this from my story, the program that I had put together was not holding together. And it was just amazing how, once again, when I really turned and was asking for help, how the right people showed up. Earl Husband in Oklahoma City, of all places, shows up. I met that man once and spent 3 hours with him. And wow. It's almost 30 years later, and my life has never been the same since that one encounter. So the right people can just have a tremendous impact on our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the right people, and it's also the right condition of openness that occurs, simultaneously, and God just makes it happen. If a person happens to be in a state where they are beginning to be open and be honest, and there isn't less necessarily somebody that's in their life at this time, he does give a formula for that. He calls it ASK, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, and knock and the door will be opened. This is Christ's own words, but right. Almost always it's just a simultaneous thing. You have an opening, and then there appears your help.
Yeah, he's got a nice quote from Jesus too there, where he says, "I hope I don't offend you." Which Jesus is saying to people, look, I may not have the the temple's blessing and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm hanging around with all the wrong crowd, but listen to the truth, and people were struck by the truth. So those people are extremely, extremely vital. And just one thing before we move on was the newcomer, that when we talk about people being kind of below me in quotes, but it's people who are looking to me for answers, that they become our teachers in many ways. And when I was reading that, I thought of an instance where this was a number of years ago, and a fellow had cancer, and he was dying, and he contacted me and said he was in the program, and he wanted to send me his reflections as he prepared for death. And I said to my wife, I said, this guy got in touch with me, and he wants me to help him die. And my wife said, in all charity, "No, you idiot. He wants to teach you how to do it."
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, I thought I had to be wise and holy and all that good stuff. No, I got to learn from this guy.
Yeah.
Totally turned the tables.
That's exactly right. And that's the thing, is the truth. The truth thing is so essential, because you're mentioning this quote from Christ about scandal, right. The scandal on the Latin. This thing is immediately assuaged by when you get honest with yourself. You're not offended. I mean, and it's so funny, an addict, with vomit all over themselves, and all kinds of terrible deeds done in public and everything else, and then you come in and you're offended by the help that you have. It's just absurd. When you start to get into the honesty part, you see how absurd it is. But the honesty thing also helps you, because it's just that thing you're saying, when it's not this, I'm going to go help this guy. It is this thing of, I'm going to be helped and also offer help to this guy. And you can come in. Otherwise, it's the reknitting of the ego, and you become somebody's guru and all. You can make a mess out of it, of course. And honesty really holds you in the right. Again, we talk about realization of need. It's got you in the right place, so you know how to relate to these three versions of people that are essential.
So now we've got the right people in our lives, and the next thing that Tom talks about is finding the right books.
Yeah.
And we have a bit of a head start there with the big book, and that has a very special place in the life of every addict, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, it's key. I think the big book is just key. And I'm moved very much by the prayer work that you're doing, this thing of early Oxford group guidance. Right. And when when you read the big book, I'm not saying it's this way from beginning to end, but it is, when you really get into it, it is very hard to say this thing that wasn't created under a species of inspiration. It's just, even when Wilson gives the account of how he had written the steps, he put some paper in front of him, and he was in a bad state of mind, and he just started to write. And it's guidance. It's like, if you want to recover, it's not, when you sit down and you get your own personal guidance from God. Well, this is like the guidance for every addict that ever existed is found in this book, and that's the first place to start, for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to deal with that one first, because he doesn't go into it in great detail in the book, but then he goes on and he lists 4 kinds of books: bad books, good books, great books, and the greatest books, which are in a category by themselves. So I wonder if you could work us through those 4 listings there.
Yeah, sure.
Let's start with the bad books. How do you know you're into a bad book?
Well, that's where, bad books, it's important to know that there are these different categories of books. I mean, maybe people intuitively just have a sense for it. Again, when you're getting into truth work and inventory work, you are sharpening your discernment skills, and so you're always trying to see, is this a waste of time? Is this an inefficient trip? Is this going to take me down the road of egotism? You know, you're constantly. It's not egotistical self-reflection. You're just trying to hone and develop self-discernment. You know, the discernment of truth, if something's good for you or not. And when it comes to bad books, usually your guts will tell you. Often, this is not something that is feeding me spiritually.
Right.
The other thing is that I believe the resource that precedes this book does. He says he's not building up to anything, but it is in order in a certain way, and the people that you're working with are very often going to help you with the books. You know, they're going to be saying, here's, this one's great, or you can, and you talk to them, you know, I'm reading this book, but here's what's going on.
Right.
You get a lot of help from the people to help discern whether a book is right for you or not.
Yeah, you may not be ready for this one. Might want to put that one on the shelf for a while.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. That's exactly right.
I had a guy do that with me. I'll never forget it. He said, Bill, you know, you're not ready for the Bible. Put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Take down this book, the big book, read this, and when you're ready, go to it.
Yeah.
And he was exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, I would go to, in the Bible, I would turn to the little section that said, take a little wine for thy stomach's sake, you know, and say, my God, look, I've been guided here.
That same thing happened. I probably told you the story, but Bill had recommended to Tom that he read the Bible. He said, you know, we all read the Bible. You know, obviously these are the early pioneers of AA, because later on you don't have as much of that. Yeah. But he told him to, you know, read the Bible, and he said, well, how the hell am I supposed to read the Bible? And Bill said, just open the damn thing and just read a few things out of it, you know?
Right.
So Tom he said he went back home, he opened up the Bible, and it said, it's not what, you know, goes into a man's mouth, it's what comes out of it. He said, damn it, I'm going to go get drunk. So he went to the bar, got totally drunk, and Bill asked him what happened. He said, well, this is what I read in the Bible. He said, you are hopeless.
So once again, there is a sense of guidance, even in regard to the books. I came across that in a couple of places when I was doing some research on the Oxford group, and they would say in the morning, read scripture or guided books. And there was the term, guided books.
Yeah.
Books that you are being guided to, that you respond to at a very, very, very deep gut level. You know, it's truth, and it's resonating deep inside of us.
Well, we got this tradition. It's an unspoken tradition, but this thing of spiritual study was a tradition that we picked up from the Oxford group without a doubt.
Right.
And AA didn't waste any time. It was 5 minutes into the creation of AA when this already took place. Bill Wilson has the spiritual experience. Some of the guys from the Oxford group, I guess it was Ebby and Sebra, they went back and said this guy had some kind of profound spiritual experience. They focus grouped it, and they said, have him read these books about spiritual experience. One was William James, which everybody that's in AA, you know, reads about the contribution and, you know, in the big book. And then the other one, which they did not refer to in AA circles, but certainly did behind the scenes, was Little Flowers of St. Francis, which, I mean, the impact and role of St. Francis, essentially Wilson said that St. Francis was the patron saint of AA, and his contribution obviously to the financial aspect to it, and the meditation that's in the 11th step and the 12 and 12, you know, and his just personal impact on Bill Wilson was huge.
Yeah,
But
I think
here
also the fact that he got naked and ran through the streets of Florence endeared him to many an alcoholic, I would think. Eh?
Exactly right. We've been talking about being stripped naked in an ego sense. Well, he was both internally and externally stripped
That's
naked.
right.
Well, but you see, this is a thing that happened. These guys, focus group, they're trying to help this man, Bill Wilson, who is in a very dire situation and has this profound experience. They're like, give him these books. It'll help him understand what the hell happened to him, you know, and that was key. And that became a major part of AA in the 1940s, late 1940s, when the Grapevine was those early editions of the Grapevine. It went under two different titles, but they ran, I think it was called Helpful Books or some, spiritual study or something. They ran a list of books to read. Yes. C.S. Lewis's Out of the Silent Planet and Hindu Psychology. And I mean, it was all kinds of these different books. And interestingly enough, Tom Powers was responsible for that section of the AA Grapevine. And you see how he later, 10 years later, whatever, is referring you to all kinds of books inside the Invitation to a Great Experiment.
Right, from many spiritual traditions.
Right,
yeah. Look at it from this point of view, from that point of view, and it's very similar. It's very, very similar.
It is, and this was a practice. You listen to Dr. Bob tell his story, and he tells you that he studied for an hour a day. Now he says, I'm not saying that anybody else has to do that. Right. But that was his study. He was in earnest to not just seek spiritual awakening, but to maintain some kind of, sanity and spiritual awakening.
Yeah. And you can really get stunted growth in some 12-step programs, don't you think? If all you will read is a conference published or conference approved literature, and there is a difference there. I kind of want to get into that. You're not going to go very far.
I totally agree. And I mean, the people who put this literature together did not relate to,
they were readers. Dr. Bob's library was extensive.
It was. Bill Wilson's was extensive.
His was extensive.
Tom had, 10,000 books or something, I mean, he used to he literally read for a living. He was a religious editor at Harper. He worked underneath Eugene Exman, who was the first man that Wilson went to when he was going to publish the big book. Mm-hmm. And had made a huge contribution by saying, look, don't let Harper publish this book. If anybody inquires for help, Harper can't handle it. You publish this book yourself. That's what you need to do. And you got a winner here. Publish this thing. It was the Oxford Group people that turned him on to Eugene Exman. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the main thing is that those that really were seeking what this book is talking about, seeking knowledge of God and union with God, we're not just doing it through prayer alone, but also through spiritual study. And they were sincerely seeking through prayer and also study. All of them were.
I try to devote an hour each morning to, and it's mostly reading. I usually have 3 books going, but I am an addict.
I am too. I always keep the Bible going just because, to go through the sections of books, there's the bad books, which we you can tell most of the time when they're bad. There's good books, and the problem with good books is just their very number. There's just so many. It's one of those things where you can get bogged down into wasting your time in them. Now, there's no hard and fast lines there. A good book for one person might be a great book for someone else. It's hard to tell. And again, discernment and help from others and stuff. And almost like a experimental guidance. You start to pick up a book and you read it, and then all of a sudden it gives you a thread to another book and another one. And, it's like you're completely led, you're led. and they'll touch you in different ways at different times.
That's
It's
right.
amazing.
That's right. And a book that you responded to, at one stage of your spiritual journey, maybe not so much further down the road. You've moved on to something else. And then there's some classics that I just keep going back to,
Yeah,
and I find authors, who really speak to me,
yeah, yeah,
and I'm not looking for any more. It's funny. I maybe got 10 or 12 that these are the men and women to whom I return to over and over again, reading their books, and some of them 4, 5, 6 times. And now I'm getting a deeper understanding of what it is they're trying to say. And they're not complicated books usually. They're usually very simple books that I'm missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very much. I saw Tom, at the very end of his life. I spent a lot of time with him right before he passed away. And actually I was there with him when he died. But his wife would read to him. At that point, he had to be read to. But she told me in the last 5 years of his life, there are only 3 books that he was, it was always the Bible, and there were 2 other books that he had, and that was it. And this is a guy who read thousands of books, Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of boils down, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
Yeah. I do want you to speak about the great books and the role of the mystics there, because when he lists them, that's what I'm seeing is the mystical element in the journey.
Yeah.
Learning from those folks.
Well, I'd have to start first with the greatest books. So the greatest books are the Holy Scriptures of mankind. And the great books are essentially commentary on the greatest books. I would almost say, and
that's good.
maybe I'm heretical here, but I would almost say that that the Big Book is a great book in the sense that it's commentary. They made it very clear that they were working directly out of the inspiration of the Bible. And that was what fed them and helped with, again, imprinting this inspiration into ink. This came off of the, central book that's responsible. If you really think about it, it's responsible for probably the greatest life change in all of humanity from the beginning of time. How many conversions can you trace back to the Bible itself? The greatest books are those, again, there are commentaries or people who are coming off of some kind of tradition, and I'll give you an example. Actually, I just read The Way of a Pilgrim, which I take to be a great book, and the main character was relating to his spiritual director, his Tourette's, and they were talking about books. There's a book in Eastern Orthodoxy called the Philokalia, which is just a bunch of writings from the early church fathers. And he's asking his Tourette's, is this book better than the Bible itself? And he said, no, it's not greater or higher than the Bible, but think of it this way. If you were to gaze at the sun directly, it would burn your eyes and it would impair you for life. But if you were to gaze at the sun through this piece of glass, you would be protected from all of its glory. And you'd be able to take in, it would be reduced, but you could take in something that you could digest, if you will. And that's what the great books are. They help you to digest, the greatest books.
That's well said. And I don't generally recommend that people dive into the Bible, that they get a book of someone who's going to guide you through it in some way, a teacher who can help you digest the pieces that you're able to digest. And I was thinking, Matt, same is true for me with the works of Carl Jung. I, in the beginning, found it very difficult. I was not really able to read Jung, but I found disciples of Jung, followers of Jung, who took his work and broke it down in ways that I could absorb. Robert Johnson being probably my first, and gone back to him, oh God, 100 times in making sense out of a master, you know? And I
Yeah,
think that's what you're
absolutely.
talking about here.
Absolutely. And I would say the same thing for Invitation to a Great Experiment. I mean, I think it's a hell of a resource. Do I
Right.
give it to every single newcomer that comes along, or
No,
no, I don't. I don't, because
no.
there are some things in here that are, it's interesting. He talks about spiritual study like eating. You know, there's, I'll use another, this is an inspiration from another book, The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which I read a page a day. It took me 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
And he, Ramakrishna gives this analogy of he says that a mother brings home fish for her family to eat. For the baby, she gives broth. For the child, she gives mashed fish. For the teenager, she gives broiled fish. And for the husband, he gets fried fish. They're all consuming the same substance. It's just tailor-made to their digestive system. And that's the same thing goes for reading. You know, it's very much like it is like digestion of
Right.
spiritual material, spiritual
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
And you want to have the right diet for you. And you want to make sure that you're not taking in something that's too rich, or
Right.
something that is deplete of, nutritional density.
Right.
It's important that you look at that, and you don't fart around with this resource. You try to do it efficiently.
Right. I was thinking when you were speaking about Ernie Kurtz writing about meditation books. And I guess he was writing in the early 70s. Said not only are there many meditation books in AA, there are too many. You know, we're just taking this baby food rather than going deeper into some of the writings and the books that are out there. It's piecemeal and not healthy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the teenager or the husband is trying to put in a day's work on fish broth,
Yeah,
they're not going to have what they need.
right.
You
So
know?
again, but it's a good way to start. It's a terrible way to end. You know, if yeah, I started on my 24-hour a day book. That was vital for me. But if that's where I'm still at, you know,
Yeah.
something hasn't happened. My old sponsor used to call it a limited conversion. I love that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like you got some of it, but you're missing some big chunks, and it's the solid food that you have to keep growing and keep changing, and then you're ready for more. And that's what makes recovery exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
It's a journey. Yeah.
Yep.
The last ingredient that he says is necessary is finding the right laboratory. So we got the right people, and we got the right books, and now where is the right laboratory? Where am I gonna go in search of this God experience? The last place you'd ever look, eh?
Yeah, that's right. There's a quote I had heard. It comes from Jung. It says something to the effect of, let's see. Hopefully, I don't lose it here. Something like the thing that you need the most will be found where you least expect it.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
It goes on to say, those who haven't found God have not looked low enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're searching the heavens. No. Don't search the heavens. Go inside. Go inside. That's where the great reality is within. Let me read this quote. I think it's really wonderful from the book. Basically saying the laboratory is your own life. That's where you need to look. This laboratory, this perfectly equipped workshop, is your own life, your body and mind, your exact circumstances, good and bad, your past, present, and future, your advantages and handicaps, your hopes and fears, everything that may properly be called you. This includes your weaknesses and shortcomings, your faults and failings, your pains and miseries, your depressions and frustrations. All these are indispensable parts of your equipment. They are just as useful and necessary as your strengths, skills, abilities, successes, pleasures, joys, and attainments. Your bad qualities are no doubt bad enough in themselves, but in this work, they are useful, provided you work with them and on them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful statement. I think of it because every morning I do kind of a confession that's it's kind of both meditation and a personal confession, or call it a 10-step, if you will.
Yeah, that's what we should do. Right, I do too.
And what I do is go over the 7 deadly sins, and basically I ask myself what these things mean, how they present themselves. Pride can be presented in selfishness and arrogance and self-will, so on and so forth. But when I get to envy and greed, I go through and I think of this desire that I have to have somebody else's car, somebody else's wife, somebody else's life, somebody else's job, this whole thing. And I think of this statement comes to me out of this book, because how foolish would it be, spiritually foolish, to have somebody else's life and abandon my own possible development, which would be only found in my own life and in my own circumstances. And how foolish that would be, spiritually speaking, and yet I sit there and I think about having somebody else's situation. The other thing I was going to say is there's a very helpful description of this, in my opinion, and I'm certain it inspired Tom both here and in the 12 and 12. The author's name is Maurice Nicoll, who was actually a student of Jung. Jung was hoping that he would take over his work. Jung was the best man in his wedding. So he was very influenced by Jung, but also by a kind of, we call it an esoteric Christianity later on. But he says that your life consists of both events and circumstances. So, these are things that happen, if you will. It's raining outside, or it's my birthday, or I, got yelled at by my boss, or, I went out on a dinner with my wife, or, whatever. Those are events or circumstances. The other part of life are states of being. And that's, where the hell am I at inside myself? If you think of the 12-step program, it's always relating to states of being. When we're in our addiction, we're always looking for our answer in circumstances and events. If only I had some more money, if only I had a different, wife or a job, or only if I had, it's always looking for, we call it the geographical cure, but it's always looking in terms of our life being improved by events and circumstances. When you get to the 12th step and it's talking about spiritual awakening, it is not talking about events or circumstances. It is talking about a state of being. And this is where our hope is there. That's where our recovery is there.
There's a flow, and I am in the flow or I am out of it,
Yeah.
And God is the flow. Well, I do a very simple kind of sharing what our 10th steps are like these days. Mine is really just that. I look outside, what's going on in my relationships, particularly the day before, and then I go inside. What's the blockage? What is the
Yeah.
thing that's blocking me from God, from life, from me? And to try to put my finger on it, and then to take that into prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's never a real answer in a manipulation of circumstances or events. That there's no real answer there, and you start to find that out when you really come in and you're being opened up. You really see that. When I don't do my prayers in the morning, I have a kind of a ugly day. Or
Right.
when I don't get ahead of some kind of indulgence in a resentment or in a sex fantasy or in self-pity or despondency, if I don't get ahead of that and honestly admit it and start to pray for help, I'm going to be nuts.
Right.
It has nothing to do with trying to get rid of the boss or have a
No,
different job or nothing at all, because he says, Nicoll says, your being attracts your life. And everywhere you go, as long as you're in that state, your life will go along with it.
right.
There's these beautiful accounts of I mentioned the book before, Return from Tomorrow. There's an account in there of a man who was in a concentration camp, and the main character was in the army. He was like something of a nurse. They're coming in as they're disbanding. The war is finally coming to an end, World War II, and they're disbanding all the persons that are in this concentration camp. And there was this man running around helping everyone, and they called him Wild Bill Cody. He had a mustache that curled up like a cowboy, and he was in extremely good condition, muscular, good shape. And the main character, he's not a character, it's a real life story. He said that guy must have just gotten into the concentration camp. And they said, no, Wild Bill's been here for 6 years. And he said, well, how did he, he must have had access to a lot of food. And they said, well, actually, he gave most of his food away.
Right.
And they said, so what the heck is going on with this guy? Well, they said that he had, before he was in the concentration camp, watched his entire family get shot down in front of his own eyes. And at that moment, as anger started to fear and anger started to be, introduced to him in a way that I have no idea how to conceive what that would be like. Immediately, he had some kind of a spiritual experience that he saw that if I let this anger in, I would be consenting to the very same thing that just killed my family in front of my eyes. And somehow the guy had this amazing experience where he was free from anger, which is something that doesn't happen to there's very few people on earth, but he spent the
Right.
rest of his life. And this is an example of what it would be like, in my opinion, where we are free from these lower states of being that are sucking our life dry, all the time.
And they are available to each and every one of us. That's why
They
the
are.
laboratory is your own life. If I were Joe or Charlie or Jose, I could do it. No, you got to do it as yourself. That's the
Yes.
only place it's going to happen. If I run
And you
off to a monastery, it's not going to work.
and
Uh,
you got and you also have to, there's a critical period of time in which you do it, and that's called now.
yeah,
Now is the time where again, is to use the thing of Nicoll. He says that states of being run vertical, your events run horizontal.
that's
Where
right.
they cross over is now.
And
It's
that's
right
your life.
now,
And that's your
and
life.
that's your life.
Yeah.
Everything else is outside of your life.
Right.
Everything else is fantasy. Everything
Well,
else
and
is insanity.
that's going to bring us to our next subject for the next episode. Is the experiment a practical possibility? So that's where we will pick up the next time. So once again, Matt, I thank you for your wisdom and your experience and your genuineness. It always comes through, And I'm sure the people out there are picking up on that. And so thank you once again for joining us on this episode.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Looking forward to more. And once again, we're going to put, Matt mentioned too many books for me to get all of them into the show notes, but I'm going to do the best I can. So if that's going to lead you to some further reading, I'd encourage you to start doing that. So thank you, all of you guys out there, for listening. Hope it was beneficial to you, and I hope you will keep coming back. God bless.